All right, everybody. Usually when I do a segment talking about the legislative news around trans people, it's not good news. It's usually very unfortunate. It's stuff that kind of mirrors the extremely anti-trans sentiment of the online right at the moment that has become completely disconnected from reality and focused on nothing but enforcing and spreading as much hatred towards trans people at any cost possible. And it usually leaves both me and I think most of you guys with a very sour taste in your mouth, which is why I'm very happy to say this particular story coming out of Georgia is actually some good news, particularly for trans youth. Judge blocks Georgia ban on hormone replacement therapy for transgender children. A federal judge has blocked the state of Georgia from enforcing part of a new law that bans doctors from starting hormone therapy for transgender people under the age of 18. So basically, this is a federal judge stepping in and saying, no, you do not get to enforce this anti-science law that will cause many to suffer. Very based. Fucking Giga Chad judge. Love to hear that. And this is a very important precedent that's been set. A very good and very important precedent. In a ruling issued Sunday, U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Garathi, I assume is how it'd be pronounced. I think the G's probably silent, granted a preliminary injunction sought by several transgender children, parents, and a community organization in a lawsuit challenging the ban. The imminent risk of irreparable harm to plaintiffs following from the ban, including risks of depression, anxiety, disordered eating, self-harm, and suicidal ideation, outweigh any harm the state will experience from the injunction, the judge wrote. That is such a great way to put it. The imminent risks of irreparable harm to the trans children outweigh any harm the state will experience from me shooting down this ban. What a great way to word it. And of course, listing all of the horrific things that trans people have to go through, particularly worse if it's, in a situation where they don't have access to gender-affirming surgeries and care. Garathi said her ruling will block enforcement of the ban on hormone replacement therapy until a further court order or a trial. We are disappointed in the judge's decision and plan to immediately appeal to protect the health and well-being of Georgia's children, said Kara Richardson, a spokeswoman for Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr. The Georgia law, Senate Bill 140, allows doctors to prescribe puberty-blocking medications, and it allows minors who are already receiving hormone therapy to continue, but it bans any new patients under 18 from starting hormone therapy. It also bans most gender-affirming surgeries for transgender people under 18. It took effect on July 1st. Garathi's ruling was an incredible victory for Georgia families, attorneys for the plaintiffs said in a statement. The American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, and the law firm O. Melvini and Myers are representing the plaintiffs. The law unapologetically targets transgender minors and denies them essential health care. True, they said. The ruling restores patients' rights to make medical decisions that are in their child's best interest, actual parent rights, by the way, and rights for the kid, rights for the actual people, unironically, but the right isn't actually in favor of rights, ironically enough. They just like to virtue signal about how they are. Including hormone therapy for their transgender children when needed for them to thrive and be healthy. At least 22 states have now enacted laws restricting or banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors, and most of those states face lawsuits. A federal judge struck down Arkansas's ban as unconstitutional, and federal judges have temporarily blocked bans in Alabama and Indiana as well. A federal appeals court on Monday lifted the temporary injunction against Alabama's law, allowing the state to enforce a ban on the use of puberty blockers and hormones to treat transgender children. That ruling by the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals could also imperil Garathi's decision. Doctors typically guide children toward therapy or voice coaching long before medical intervention. At that point, puberty blockers and other hormone treatments are far more common than surgery. They have been available in the US for more than a decade and are standard treatments backed by major doctors' organizations, including the American Medical Association and literally dozens of others, as well as many that are not American organizations. A lot of European medical organizations, too. The plaintiffs in the Georgia lawsuit did not ask to immediately block the surgery ban, which remains in effect. During 2 days of hearings earlier this month, Garathi heard conflicting testimony about the safety and benefits of hormone therapy to treat adolescents with gender dysphoria, the distress felt when people's gender expression does not match their gender identity. Experts for the family said the benefits of gender-affirming care for adolescents are well established and profound. State government experts raised concerns about the risks of hormone treatment and the quality of studies establishing its effectiveness. In her ruling, Garathi said witnesses for state health officials set a very high bar for evidence of hormone therapy's benefit and a low bar for evidence of its risks. She noted that experts agreed that prolonged use of puberty blockers was harmful to a person's health and inadvisable. For the transgender children, well, because they're not made for long-term use. That's not what puberty blockers are for. They're, like, by definition, puberty blockers are a temporary thing, but, I mean, there's no argument there. For the transgender children in the lawsuit, time is of the essence, she wrote, and SB 140 could cause them to suffer heightened gender dysphoria and unwanted and irreversible puberty. Probably the most important thing to glean from this is that the judge specifically pointed out that the state experts in question, quote-unquote, set a very high bar for evidence that, for their standard of evidence that proved that, you know, trans-affirming care was helpful for trans people, and a very, very low bar of evidence for it being harmful to trans people, particularly youth. That is what the judge herself said. So it's very clear that even the judge was able to see straight through the propagandistic lies of the state experts that were brought in to try and argue in favor of the ban. Now, if you're wondering, who are these state experts? Well, I can give you guys a pretty good example. So here's a good example. Interview excerpt with Kansas Attorney General, or Arkansas, sorry, not Kansas. Arkansas Attorney General Leslie Rutledge with Jon Stewart. I think this is a pretty good breakdown of what the experts are saying within the government, quote unquote, because she basically uses that same argument in this video. Here, just check this out and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The types of people pushing for these bans are this woman. This woman is one of the people pushing those bans in Arkansas. So this should give you a good idea of what their argumentation is like when met with someone who's actually brought science and facts to the table. And probably a good approximation of what the argument the judge would have saw looked like.
Why would the state of Arkansas step in?
Here, this is really quiet. I'm gonna have to volume boost it. Here we go. I love that fucking response he says. But you know that's not true. Just straight up, not angrily, not accusatorily, just matter-of-factly, but you know that's not true. Because she does. She's a lying piece of shit. They all are. They're demons. And so he just outright says, but you know that's not true. It's so goddamn good. It's so good.
There's one.
He's so fucking powerful, dude. You can't see it because, like, you can't see infrared light. Our eyes aren't made for it. But he is literally emanating infrared radiation right now. Her lungs, her fucking, glands and every organ in her body are currently sprouting with tumors because he is blasting gamma rays across the room from just the pure emanating power of his presence right now. We can't see it, but she is actively growing tumors from the radiation.
That doesn't comport with any of the...
Oh, he's blasting all spectrums of radiation. You don't understand. It's just pure. Where's the full list? There's a... It's not the full list, but it's a much longer one. Here, let me see. Here, let's see. What's that big list of organizations in that Ultimate Research doc? The American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, the Human Rights Campaign, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Osteopathic Pediatricians, the United Nations, the United Kingdom's National Health Service. Yeah. Yeah, that's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. And that's not even the whole list. That's just a different list, you know? Like when you go to like different like sources, you can get a different list of different organizations. It's pretty much the entire, not pretty much, sorry, I should watch my words there. The entire consensus within the medical, psychological, and sociological sphere is that trans-affirming procedures are good for people suffering from gender dysphoria because it helps them, that sex and gender aren't the same thing, that gender is socially constructed and not, like, bound to sex as being like, oh, there's just two. Not only that, but the consensus is also that sex is not a simple binary either, but instead a bimodal distribution of sexual characteristics. We also recognize that chromosomes are far more complicated than like we initially would have believed, or at least you would have initially thought if you just kind of learned about, you know, XY chromosomes and XX chromosomes in like your normal like middle school classroom. Like you learn about like Mendel and like the P's or whatever. And you're like, whoa, okay, so that's how genetics works. Okay, that's honestly pretty simple. It's like one of those like 4 ways swap 'em up games, right? It seems pretty simple, but then in reality, if you get to any advanced form of any research or discipline that studies the way of the world, whether it be math, physics, science, whatever it may be, you come to find it's a lot more complicated than you were ever led on to believe in your earlier education on the topic. Like the Punnett square, yeah. In this case, they're basically relying on most people's education on sex, gender, sociology, and all of these things to basically be stunted at around middle school, which is the case for a lot of their voter demographic who probably haven't been to school in a very long time. And not only that, but you know they don't want the truth being taught because in places like Florida, they are actively banning across the entire state the teaching of advanced placement psychology. Because if you take an advanced placement psychology class to get the college credits, you have to learn that sex and gender aren't the same thing and that there aren't just two genders and that sex isn't just a binary. That's part of what you learn in AP psychology. And because that goes against the conservative values that the states controlled by Republicans want to instill in kids, they're banning the entire class. It's almost like the world is more complicated than just A and B. Almost like that's the case, huh? So the scenario here would actually be she takes her kid to the doctor. The doctor's like, yeah, your kid has cancer. He needs targeted radiation and chemotherapy. It's going to be really rough on him, but it's the only way to give him a chance of longer life. And she was like, no, we're going to pray the cancer away. Then that's a more accurate. That's a more accurate. I really like Jon Stewart's like everything pretty much. Like he's one of my favorite like mainstream political pundits, if you want to call him that. Like I'd say he kind of like he ascended from like, you know, TV comedian guy, like talk show host to, I would say, serious political activist and pundit. I think what really made it clear how serious he is about this shit was his testimony for relief for the first responders on 9/11. Like he was legitimately crying while giving that testimony. It was like 30 minutes of testimony where he's just grilling the people, the legislators up on the stage. And the funniest part as well is most of them aren't there. It's an empty room. So he's saying shame on you for not even being here. And it's, you know, all on live TV as well. You can see the empty chairs with the plaques with the names of who didn't show up, who isn't there as the camera pans over as he's saying, shame on you for not fucking being here. So every other medical issue you might face, the state of Arkansas does not agree with these mainstream medical institutions, not on cancer, not on schizophrenia, not on anything you could possibly list, but on this whole trans issue that they have been obsessed about and have been politicizing and demonizing in their media for years and years and years. All of a sudden, they're acting as though there's some sort of body of evidence or institutional, scientifically peer-reviewed data they're using to back up their policymaking. And when actually put on camera and grilled about whether or not there is a single shred of evidence or truth to what they're arguing, they fall apart and they flounder, just like this woman is. Yeah, so they basically just fall apart and say, well, I just wasn't prepared for this argument, I guess. And I'm imagining that's very much how the argument the judge in this ruling probably, like, what that judge probably saw go down. Pretty close to that interaction. I'll once again read the response that Judge, I really hope I'm not messing up her name, because she's based as hell, Garathi, I'll read what her quote was. In her ruling, Judge Garathi said witnesses for state health officials set a very high bar for evidence of hormone therapy's benefit and a low bar for evidence of its risks. She noted that experts agreed that prolonged use of puberty blockers was harmful to a person's health and inadvisable. Prolonged meaning like long-term use, meaning like a thing people don't do unless they've got a hormone disorder. Like, you wouldn't do prolonged hormone blockers for a trans person. It's something you give to a teenager or, like, a minor for, like, a few years until they're ready to go through the puberty that they want to go through. It's, like, by definition, not a thing that's meant to take for a long time. However, there are many, many people that I've even known in real life who have pituitary gland disorders, and they have to take hormone supplements or blockers depending on like the situation. I guess this is kind of a funny story around this. I was on the swim team, and it was like my first day on the high school swim team, and there was this girl who was like the assistant to the coach. And by looking at her, you would have thought that she was in the same grade as me, you know? Like, you would have thought that she was a young kid in school like me and not an adult. Like, by her voice and by how she looks, you would just immediately assume that. But she did have an air about her that was, like, very mature, but I was just assuming, well, she's the assistant to the coach. That's why she's very mature and talks like an adult. And so I eventually started hitting on her. I was about 15, 14, I don't remember. Came to find out after a brief convo that she was 26. I didn't rizz her up or anything. It was just after like 5 back and forths. I asked her like, what school do you go to? Do you go to this school or do you go to like a nearby one? And she was like, I graduated high school like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I was like, how old are you? And she explained that she had like a pituitary gland thing that made her look, you know, like she was 16 or something. And I was like, holy shit. Well, no, she literally looked like she was my age, so it wasn't a MILF chaser moment. I literally thought she was like a peer of my age group, but she was actually 26 years old. So yeah, pretty funny story. But like, yeah, she would take medications like this, but as a cis person, there would be no politicization of that medication and her taking it, and so it wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be banned. But because trans people, much like gay people and literally every other LGBT demographic before, have been so heavily politicized, the right has a strong incentive to try and ban the existence of trans people legislatively, at least as much as they can within, like, practical reason. Yes, they're doing the same thing with abortion, exactly.